America's workforce. Its strength is our nation's success. Join Ronnie Spellman on I Build America podcast as we explore innovative solutions and inspiring stories from leaders and workers shaping America. Discover actionable insights to build a motivated workforce.
Welcome to the I Build America podcast. I'm with Dr. Jonathan Woods. Welcome.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
You drove a long way to get here just to meet with us, and I am extremely appreciative. You're the Senior Fellow for the American Council on Education, but you also spent time in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. So you have quite an illustrious career, and I'm honored to have you as a part of our program.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I know you changed your schedule. You had some other events, and you made it happen.
Well, I'm trying to build the next generation of the workforce. So I do teach a middle school writing course every Tuesday. So yeah.
So you're living it every day. You're not just in some executive office.
That's right.
You're actually, it's interesting when you get kind of the player coach. Mm-hmm. Someone who's coaching an operation, leading an operation, but they stay, for instance, in the classroom. Mm-hmm. Just to make sure that they're learning. It's funny, and you probably see the same thing. I learn so much from the kids when I'm in the classroom, voluntary.
Yeah, no, it's true. They teach you so much. What I find most fascinating is I remember learning to sort things out in my mind and prioritize and classify things from my middle school learning experience. And I see that and it sparks some memories in me. So that's nice.
My fifth grade teacher, Mr. Gurley, who's now deceased, had an incredible impact. I only knew him the 1 year because I just moved to a school district. But you're absolutely right on. When you think back to those periods of time, and that one person can make a difference in education.
Right. And you feel the pressure, the responsibility to be that difference that the next generation needs.
So walk me through your journey. What have you done? It's interesting as I look at workforce development across the United States and what we're doing here with the podcast. Our goal is to bring people like you to the table so that other people around the country, adults, not just the kids, right, can learn from what you've accomplished, what you've done, and the impact that you've had. But walk us through your journey so that we can give them some context on your experience and your impact.
Yeah, sure. I grew up in the Central Valley of California.
Did you?
King Valley. Yeah, I did.
I spent a lot of time in the Central Valley, Bakersfield and Fresno.
Yeah, I was between Bakersfield and Fresno. And to this day, if you buy a box of Sun-Made raisins, you can turn it, and the processing plant, 100% of them are processed in my hometown of Kingsburg, California.
I love it.
So I spent a lot of time in those fields to produce those raisins.
Sequoias, I love going to visit with my daughter, and wonderful area.
Yeah.
Kern River.
Kern River, of course. Yeah. So so the area.
I do.
And it's a great place to be from. It was a great place to grow up. And I had some aspirations coming out of high school. And didn't quite know what to do with those aspirations. I went to the community college, and at that time, you paid a flat fee of like $50 or something like that, and take up to 18 hours. And so there was no real financial burden to education. But then when I wanted to move up to the senior institution, I applied to Fresno State, which is only 20, 30 minutes from my house. And
great school, by the way.
Fantastic school. Yeah, the Bulldogs. Give them a plug, although I never attended a class there because I wasn't prepared for the financial issues. And so on my way to financial aid, an enterprising recruiter had set up a shop, and next thing I knew, I was on my way to the Navy and spent some time in the Navy. And
fantastic.
But you couldn't beat the GI Bill and the opportunities that it provided. As a former boss of mine in the office of the Chief of Naval Operations, his name was Scott Lutterlow, and he said, service even today still offers an opportunity to change economic tiers in a single generation with one single decision.
Wow.
And that's, I couldn't have articulated it then, but that's what prompted me into service. And I like to say I was one and done. I did one hitch and loved it, but wanted to, see what was next.
Sure.
And so I used the GI Bill. I got a bachelor's degree from Southern Illinois University in Workforce Education and Development.
Okay.
And
Southern Illinois, by the way, is another great institution.
Fantastic institution. Yeah, exactly. I learned so much there. And what I learned was a passion for the adult learner and the adult learning proposition. And especially, how to prepare someone to enter the workforce. It's not just about learning for learning's sake.
Right.
In a lot of cases, it's learning for productivity's sake.
Right.
And so got some good foundations there at Southern Illinois. And then I began building curriculum and doing a lot of front-end analysis. I became a consultant for front-end analysis on curriculum development.
And was that right out of Southern Illinois?
That was right out of Southern Illinois. Yeah,
You started early.
Well, you might say I started late because I was 25 by that time.
Right, but not by age, but just by experience.
Yes, that's right.
So to go right into writing curriculum without really any business or practical experience is impressive.
It was, what was impressive was that people took a chance on me.
Right,
and,
exactly.
and let me show what I had.
Right.
And so I found myself very early on moving right into, big corporate or industrial problems and helping them find the learning solutions for their problems. Now, not every problem is a learning solution,
Sure.
but those that are, it was really fun to see real projects that were causing pain, productivity pain, or financial pain to the institution or the organization, and building a solution around that. So that was pretty cool.
So you're writing curriculum for what specifically, though, and what kind of organization?
Probably about 10 or 15% industrial stuff, but maybe a little bit more than that, maybe up to 20%, but 80% of it was learning solutions for military applications. Okay. So anything from maintenance challenges on Army Blackhawks to engineering problems in U.S. Navy warships.
And you were out of the military by this point.
I was out of the military by this point.
Fascinating.
Yeah. So
and then what?
Then I was doing graduate studies at night, and so I took an MBA from a local university, Jacksonville University. I was in Jacksonville, Florida at the time.
Okay.
And then moved over to Gainesville, which is a bit of a hike from Jacksonville Beach, but did a doctoral program in higher education administration and at Gainesville, at University of Florida in Gainesville. Yeah.
Just making sure.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Don't confuse it with the other one. Yeah.
Right.
But that was fascinating because it really let me in on, I did a lot of work in the linkage, the interaction between higher education and developing programs in higher education to support business and industry. And so I studied a lot of, at the time, in the 90s, one of the world's foremost leaders in the relationship between education and productivity was Burton Clark out at UCLA. And so I studied a lot of Burton Clark stuff. I did a dissertation dealing with job satisfaction and the interaction between learning and job satisfaction.
Sure.
And but that springboarded me a little bit more into higher education.
So that's interesting. I don't know if you studied the management by objectives.
Yeah.
And the founder of that concept. Mm-hmm. He did a lot of work, if I remember correctly, for GE back in the early days. And you just made me think of him given the work. And he made a lot of ties between nonprofit, for-profit, and government. Mm-hmm. And that all of those systems need to work together to create the right cultural environment for productivity and job creation and the like. But there was a lot of research.
Yeah, that's right. There was a lot of research. And I took a step backwards and a step forward. So I studied a lot of the behavioral psychologists that contributed to the literature on workforce development, things like that. I did a dissertation on Friedrich Herzberg, for example, two-factor theory on motivator hygiene theory on workforce satisfaction, but also looking ahead as well to, all right, well, what do we do about it? And a lot of the theorists of the time were helpful, but you're right. Looking at the interactions between the different societal structures that we have, the education, the industry, the support infrastructure, and that sort of thing, and how to make them work, which has been very useful.
So what's been your conclusion? What's your hypothesis? Have you written your book yet to solve the challenge for everyone?
Well, I have a metaphor for you, Ronnie. Can I share a metaphor?
Absolutely.
Your audience is going to be very familiar with the sand dollar metaphor. It's a long story, but I submit to you that, or it's an old story, but I submit to you that it is act one of a 2-act morality play.
Okay.
And so the story goes like this. Grandfather and grandson are walking the beach following a big storm, and it's calm now, but there are thousands, maybe tens of thousands of live sand dollars strewn about the beach from the storm wash. And every now and then the grandfather stoops down, picks up a sand dollar and tosses it back into the ocean. And after a while of this, the child says, "Grandfather, what are you doing?" And he says, "Well, that's the sound of freedom right there."
I love it.
Yeah, that's right.
I love the airplane.
Yeah, that's right. And so we're right next to NAS Oceana, and it's a beautiful sound.
It is.
But the child says, "What are you doing, grandfather?" And the grandfather says, "Well, I'm trying to make a little bit of a difference here." And the child looks around, and he says, "But there's thousands of these things. How can you possibly make a difference?"
Right.
And the grandfather reaches down, picks up another, tosses it in, and said, "Well, to that one, I made all the difference in the world."
Right.
Okay, that's act one of a morality play around what we can do and what we should do. And it's beautiful, and it's a beautiful sentiment that that the grandfather would want to save what he can from that. But the act two of the morality play is scaling. Right. And so on a 1-to-1 scale, you see, in act one, the grandfather's right. In act two, the child is right.
Right.
And the child's like, what difference can you make at such a small scale? We need to scale.
Right.
And so what I've been building around and the way that my career progression has found itself emerging is to do things at scale. Yeah. And what's, and so, you know, if we have an interventionist and a recipient of the intervention, and we have a 1-to-1 ratio between interventionist and intervention, that's not at scale, and it can never scale.
Right.
But if we can go 1 to 10, 1 to 100, 1 to 1,000, 1 to 1,000,000, then we're starting to do something that is meaningful in act two of the morality play.
Now, you made me think of an example. There was a parent who was having some challenges with their child in school. And the child was a wonderful kid. They suffered through COVID. And they were working with the counselors and the principal at this school. And the response from the school as they were trying to address this specific issue for their kid was that we have 2,000 kids, the administration, we have 2,000 kids to worry about, indicating that their kid is just one of 2,000, that they can't focus on the one. And the parents' response was kind of resembling what you mentioned from the sand dollar is, I understand those 2,000 kids are important, but this is my one kid. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And I'm here to resolve this issue because I'm trying to help this one kid reach their potential.
Right.
And you're right. Sometimes you've got to take that one and you go one at a time. Mm-hmm. In business, I used to have a coworker that always say this to me. We were working on these massive projects, awarding a lot of contracts. That region was a $6 billion operation. And the question was that they would often ask is, how do you land a plane? Right. One plane at a time. Mm-hmm. That's right. You don't land them all at once, but it's like, how do you take that one and then how do you scale it so that you can effectively help those 2,000 kids or effectively land all the planes that are in the airspace? And there's a lot of, I guess, dance to that process to make it work well.
Yeah, no, there is. And I was fortunate enough to be given the responsibility for this program at my previous position where we had I think about 270,000 users, recipients of a learning benefit. And I was procuring for them, for their use, 675,000 college courses a year.
Oh, wow.
And so there was QA and QC.
675,000 college courses. That's incredible.
Yeah. And so, and I might say post-secondary education courses, because not all of them were college academic credit, credit-bearing academic courses. But what I realized is that there's a big question there, and the big question is, for what?
Right.
And for decades, we've assumed that the for what is, well, for personal and professional growth of the individual, according to their articulated needs.
Sure.
Okay. Articulated where? Articulated how?
Right.
And is there a way, the investment is astronomical. It's south of $1 billion a year, but not much south of that. And so the taxpayers are investing quite a bit in programs like this. And the question becomes, is there something that the taxpayers get back from that? In addition to the individual? And so one way to look at that is to look at successive tiers of productivity. Okay. And so I think in terms of activities, that's something that is a tier of productivity. Right. You have to engage in activities, things like counseling, academic advisement and counseling for recipients of a benefit. But there's other things like quality control I mentioned before, like running the center that manages these operations. Right. These are activities, time to completion, things that reduce time to completion, like testing and credit for prior learning. All of these things are activities, and they're good, and you can measure effectiveness on activities. But better than activities is outcomes. Right. And so what outcome did we get from all of these activities? And so you might say, well, we got, I threw some stats out already. We got 670,000 courses bought. We got 660,000 of them completed, effectively completed and with a good grade. Right. We got 50,000 degrees was usually, the number per year that we were generating from this. And so these are all outcomes, and they're good outcomes. Right. They're exciting and great. But there's a higher tier of productivity, and that tier is impact. It's like, how do they impact the nation? How do they impact the economic goals of the nation? Sure. And so you can look at things like, recruitment and retention into the services. That's an impact. And you can benchmark those things and see if your activities and your outcomes are influencing that recruitment and retention. You can look at things like personal and professional growth. My favorite target to look at, what's fascinating, was what the economists call endogenous growth. Sure. And I'm not an economist, but as I understand it, endogenous growth is those things internal to the nation that you can do to make it more efficient. And one of the biggest factors in endogenous growth efficiency through endogenous growth is human capital development. Okay. And so it occurred to me that if we know what we're looking for, we can benchmark the activities, the outcomes that contribute to endogenous growth as an impact. Sure. And
now, I'd love to get your insight, particularly given what you just mentioned. I've not had a policy or theory kind of conversation with anyone, so this is fun. Oh, yeah. And you're Dr. Woods, so. But oftentimes through my lifetime, I've had conversations around policy and the impact of policy. You think, what's the return for the taxpayer? Mm-hmm. I remember having a friend of mine before he had kids talk about the idea of him paying taxes that went to a school that he doesn't benefit from. Mm-hmm. And this was before he had kids. I'm sure his philosophy has changed a little now, because having an effective school system that his kids can go to, there is a return. Now, it's not, and I've had this conversation in companies as well relative to human resources. that when you look at having a talented workforce in a private for-profit company, you can't look at it like a widget where when you add all the cost of that widget, including the electricity bill for a facility, you come up with the cost for that individual widget. And you have to charge more than it costs you to make it, and you can look at the return based on that margin. Yeah. On the people side, it's a little different. So oftentimes I speak with them about employees and not having turnover. So we take an employee, let's say they make a few errors, we work with them to make them more highly productive. It is easier to make them more highly productive than it is to replace them from a cost standpoint. But getting someone to understand it that's used to looking at a widget and making that return on investment analysis is just a different thought process.
Right.
So when we look at a return on a taxpayer dollar, there are probably some different ways to look at it. And so I was intrigued by some of your comments on the return on investment and the human capital side.
Yeah, well, human development, human talent development, there's some theorists that go back. One that your discussion and question sparked is Gary Rumbler from probably the 80s or 90s. And he talked about that very thing is when you have a human performance problem, what do? You can't replace the human efficiently. You could, but it's not an efficient solution to your problem. Right. And so how do you repair the human? So he had a process, but step one in the process is look one step above. Look at the supervisor, look at the supervision.
Agreed.
And the leadership, and see what they think and see how they understand the performance. Because it's probable that there's some understanding that you can work on at the higher level as well as the junior level.
That, or potentially even, and I've seen this, it's always intriguing to say this publicly, but in some cases, maybe often, a lot of times the person's performance is partly related to how the manager trained them. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at the manager as well to make sure that they're giving that employee the right tools that they needed to be successful.
Yeah.
And that's also a critical piece. So I'm looking at both ends and making that assessment. Is that person just not a good fit? Like there's no way that they can recover.
Yeah.
Or can we salvage this relationship, this employee-employee relationship, and make them productive? Yeah. And I'm always working hard, at least I've always been working hard to try to make sure that we can salvage that and give them an opportunity to showcase their ability. Yeah. Because oftentimes I think most people are willing to make the adjustment. They just need some coaching.
Yeah, that's right. That goes all the way back to, you probably have heard from the 50s, Mager talked a lot about, he had a bunch of flow charts like that. And one of the flow charts was, did the supervisor teach the performance?
Right.
Was it taught well?
Right.
And so on. And so yes, no, and if the no is reteach it, maybe with a different, from a different teacher, something like that.
And here's what's interesting. I just had a conversation last night and we were discussing the idea of training programs. Mm-hmm. And people take information differently. Mm-hmm. And so I had a trainer say what they've needed to figure out is if they're finding that the vast majority of the students in the class aren't passing the exam, then they're looking at themselves to figure out how do they say something differently so that it resonates with the class. Mm-hmm. Because the goal isn't to make the class difficult. It's to give the information and to make sure people learn it so they can pass or become proficient. Right. So he was reevaluating how he taught it, what words he used, what examples he used to help them get it differently.
Than
before.
For 3 or 4 years, I had the most fascinating job in the world. You've seen Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares,
right?
Where he goes in and he tells them, "Well, you idiot, you're supposed to do it this way," and tells them how to do it right and fix their kitchen nightmare. Well, I had curriculum nightmares. I had a job where it was my job to go into these schoolhouses and figure out what was wrong. And I remember working on this one curriculum where they got to a certain point, a test. It was a naval engineering program, and they got to a certain point, and they had to have a test on how to do a sounding. And what a sounding means is like how much. If I don't have a electronic gauge, how do I tell how much fuel or liquid is in a cylindrical vessel? And so the test was how to do a proper sounding, and the instructor, and so nobody could figure out why one instructor had a 20 or 21% pass rate and everyone else had a 94% pass rate.
Right.
And so I went and watched a few of these sessions, and I noticed that this instructor was messing with the plumb bob for the sounding. And I said, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm putting the plumb bob on wrong and seeing if they catch it."
Okay.
And so, they didn't realize that they were being tested on whether the equipment was set up properly. That wasn't a learning objective or a performance objective under the test. And so, but it captures your point exactly.
Yeah.
If we lose sight of the learning process and we focus on trying to trick someone into, how clever are you? If the test is how clever are you and not how well do you know the material, there may be a problem.
I agree. And so what's fascinating, and people might ask when listening to this, how does this relate to workforce development? From a business perspective, and the businesses that I've helped to run, I can either keep my employee base consistent without losing or having a high turnover. And you do that by making sure you give people that opportunity to succeed. I think some managers I've learned in my career, they're okay with the turnover. And I'm not okay as a leader in that organization with their being okay of the turnover. Mm-hmm. So how do I address my workforce development needs? By reducing turnover.
Yeah.
Now, the lower my turnover is within the organization, the less of a workforce development need or recruiting need that I have.
Right.
And for me, there's a smaller cost because I don't have to pay all of the extra costs in that turnover. You get lost productivity in turnover. You have someone that's not being able to perform a certain duty that's clearly needed. If I didn't need the position, then I need to eliminate the position, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a cost from a workforce development perspective on the private for-profit side of the operation, and I presume in any other organization as well. Yeah. How did you end up at the Secretary of Defense?
Well,
so you went from Florida, getting your PhD, then what?
And I was a consultant for a number of years, and I did a lot of work, like I said, those kitchen nightmares or classroom nightmares, and looked at a lot of curriculum, and started working and found that I was working with a lot of different federal procurers of instructional content, and they had a position, a vacancy, and they said, "Gee, you'd be great for this." And so one of the things I used to say is the two proudest days of my career was the day, number one, the day I chose the Navy, and number two, the day my Navy called me back. And so I went to work as a DoD civilian for the Navy, working on had a highfalutin title. I had a branch they called the Science of Learning branch, and I was directing this branch.
Okay.
And so
Science of Learning branch. Incredible.
Yeah. It was very cool. And the idea was very basic but very profound. And that is that learning and workforce preparation doesn't come from gut instinct.
Right.
No one's instincts are good enough to make it to make it great and to make it prescriptive and predictive, and productive, therefore productive. And so, but fortunately for us, there is a science behind how to make it prescriptive and predictive, how learning predictive. And, the idea is that if you follow the recipe, the prescription, you can help anybody to do anything.
Sure.
Everybody is capable of almost any job.
I agree.
It's just we got to build the capacity properly.
Do you think we spend too much time on resumes? It's you just made me think of that, because I think sometimes I think there's a disconnect between the job descriptions that are published and then the resumes from this perspective. The job descriptions are a wish list of everything that someone generally would like to have for a candidate. And then the resumes oftentimes might not say enough because you can't put enough up there. And then everyone is being told that your resume shouldn't be any longer than 2 pages. And when you get 20 years of experience, 2 pages just sometimes isn't enough. But how do we bridge that so that we are getting people ready for work and matching them with the jobs that are available? How do we resolve that to make workforce work well?
Yeah. I have a pet theory I haven't tested it at all. But my pet theory is that we say to someone through resumes, through giving them an interview, or even just reviewing their credentials.
Sure.
We say to them, you have obviously put the time in, and it's worth a look from me.
Okay.
But and that's what we say overtly, but there's a tacit message behind that we don't say out loud, and that is, but I still don't trust you.
Okay.
And so the key is which of those tools, whether it's a credential database, where, someone like I might possess a credential and I get myself in a database, and then through machine language, big corporations might hit on that and say, well, here's this guy. And there may be even a resume behind it. But none of those, whether the credential that I hold that's in the database or the resume that I have prepared that's in the database, they don't answer the question, should I trust you?
Gotcha.
And so I'm not sure. I'm not an expert on how to build that trust. But I know this. This is fascinating to me. In 1971, a guy by the name of Michael Spence won the Nobel Prize in economics on a theory he called signaling theory.
Okay.
And he tested this, it was a negotiation strategy, but he tested his signaling theory of negotiation on possessors of a baccalaureate degree.
Okay.
And so he looked at the hiring process and the negotiation between hiring managers and hiring and applicants for a job. And what he found was that the baccalaureate degree sent a signal, and the signal was, I can trust you.
Okay.
And so how, well, you got to read Spence's study and books. He wrote several of them on it to get to the point, but of how it sends that signal. But the idea is it's based in trust. How do I trust that you're going to perform well for me?
Right.
And so I guess just to give the answer very quickly, Spence found that if you possess a baccalaureate degree, you have managed three resources. Everybody has three resources in varying capacity or degrees. We have money, time, and intellect.
Okay.
And so if you and he considers Spence considered a baccalaureate degree a nearly impossible task.
Okay.
Yet, between those three resources, you figured out a way to achieve the nearly impossible task. Right. And so that's a signal that I can trust you because you understand these three resources and can manage them.
So I have to tell the producer, I definitely want you back on because I think your intellect and concepts are so important to share across the workforce development space. Even the idea of how do I trust that you'll perform well for me? That is a very real question. And I think sometimes I spent some time with this big executive recruiter. And what they mentioned, they pulled us in, some of the executives, and they said, we've been recruiting wrong. We're finding that a lot of the executives we place are great at interviewing. They do a fantastic job getting the job. And then we find we have to replace them soon thereafter because their outcomes and performance aren't as great as their interview skills. But they're great at getting someone to trust them in that interview, which is fascinating to me. And the question is, how do you find that trust in someone that might not interview as well, but they can do the job very well? So that's an interesting premise that you mentioned.
It is. There's so many fascinating dimensions to workforce development. And then more important even than workforce development is workforce productivity. Right. It's like, okay, let's develop them and then let's get them into an environment where they can be productive, so that we can achieve our national goals.
Dr. Woods, thank you for joining us. This has been an incredible conversation, a little different than maybe some of the people that they were here, but I love the insight that you give that people may not often hear with your level of experience. So I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate you joining us on the I Build America podcast, where we're bringing to you ideas and concepts like Dr. Woods and sharing with us information that helps you to continue to grow and expand and boast successes in your programs. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you for listening to the I Build America podcast. Please subscribe, share, and comment, and be sure to join us next time for more insights and inspiring conversations on building a powerful American workforce. I Build America, building workforce success one podcast at a time.